Okay, with that, it's 7:03 a.m. and I think we have people joining still, but I think we're going to start this webinar off so we can get the best use of everybody's time. So I want to thank our participants and attendees for joining this call. Good morning to everyone. A little bit of housekeeping. If you have a question for any of our panelists or this topic in general, please use the Q&A button that you should see somewhere on your screen. And if you need any technical assistance, please use the raise hand function. And what we'll do is we're going to speak for about 40 minutes and then save the last 15, 20 minutes for some questions. So with that, I want to talk about today's topic, which is engaging attorneys takes empathy, innovation, and strategy. And as we kick off this webinar, I think it's important to think about why we would almost shun 80% of the market, 80% of customers, and focus this webinar just on the legal industry, and why we'd be so specific to this industry. And the way we really approach this or think about this conversation is that in the legal industry, most firms, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more later, consider just their attorneys as alumni, and they choose to not always include their operational staff. And if this was transferred to other markets and other businesses, this is like having an alumni network for just global vice presidents or higher, the top of most organizations. So these are the hardest of the hardest people to engage, people who often have the job they want, they have their career trajectory figured out, they know all the people they think they need to know, they're financially sound enough to not be looking for a discount. So out the gate, all the value drivers people generally associate with an alumni network are generally not relevant to attorneys. And so what this has meant is that the whole needs matrix of what attorneys want and the different personas really requires such constant innovation, such constant iterative thinking, and probably the most important thing is a real understanding of the audience you're engaging. So this is more than just having some empathy for the end user. This is a fundamental requirement to dig into what motivates and drives these individuals and a kind of alignment of an alumni program to these people's overall life and business needs. So the reason the legal industry and the reason alumni programs for the legal industry become so critical for the rest of the market is if you can make it work for lawyers, we believe you can shift that thinking across all alumni programs to all different organizations globally. And to give this some context, I have a couple of really great examples that I've seen recently that I love. So many organizations run for their alumni program a this month in history. So often most large companies, they have a historian, they have the whole story going from one person who had an idea all the way to today, they're on the stock exchange and they're worth $100 billion. And so many organizations for their alumni networks tend to post a this month in history on their social. Maybe they do an interview with someone who is part of that history. And so what we saw is one of the law firms says, well, we don't have quite as an exciting history aside from more offices and more growth and more headcount. But what we have done is we have created partners that have gone on to the rest of the world and done incredible things. We have had partners who've gone on and created amazing case law, who've gone into the public sector. So we saw one organization, one law firm take this concept of this month in history and make it theirs by highlighting partners that have left the firm and gone on to do amazing things. A recent one, at November of last year, this ex-partner became the general counsel of Uber. In this month of 10 years ago, this partner was nominated to X, Y, and Z. And so we start to see kind of law firms think about different ways to take what works in other sectors and align it to themselves and make it scale and make it relevant, again, for the top of the people that they're trying to engage and what's so important. I think another example that we saw that we really loved was about community spaces. So we saw a large professional services organization offer their alumni a shared working space in the office. And many law firms don't have as much free space to be able to do that. But one of them said, well, why don't we just allow our alumni to join our WeWork account? And they can come in and they can work from a free space anywhere around the world. So the point being is law firms are thinking or have to think harder about every idea and try and find this magic that will resonate with, again, this top of the top of the organization. So what we've seen is really these leaders that are running the law firm alumni programs are being forced to innovate, execute, and almost ideate faster and more efficient than ever to maintain people's engagement, to make sure there's an ever-changing suite of benefits. And the volume of programming that we're seeing and the ideas at play we're seeing in this industry is really so applicable for the rest of the industry. So at the same time, there's also this changing recognition that we're going to talk about with our guest today, that what worked yesterday won't work tomorrow. the vanilla Alumni 1.0 legacy strategy of build a network, send an email, send a harassment campaign until they join, do an event, and kind of this whole if you build it, they will come mentality is fundamentally not true. And so I think the reality is everything has to start by being really honest about being willing to try, test, and being able to communicate and effectuate your plan to your alumni and to your organization. So I'm really keen to hear from our guests today because they have such context, they have such different history, different experience, and almost, I imagine, some of the scars to prove their experience. So whether that's their start in the education space and how that's impacted their understanding of engagement, to running a professional services alumni program in the hundreds of thousands of members, to launching a program from scratch in almost record time, really hearing this opinion of how the work they've done in other areas has impacted and led to success in what they're doing now. You know, I cannot imagine that some of the conversations we're going to have today won't have a little bit of controversy, and I think that's a good thing. Differing opinions provides really good opportunity for new opinions, and sometimes that intersection of difference of opinion is the launchpad to new ideas. And so controversy to us is not a negative statement, it's a factual one, which is an opportunity to learn and hear from our guests. So with that, I'm really keen to jump in and hear how our guests today have welcomed this challenge of rethinking their alumni programs. And I'm excited to hear their stories around what they've done. I think what's excited me the most is that, Adrienne, you come from EY with 250,000 alumni, or Danya coming from Verisk, where she launched their new alumni program. So huge insights post-implementation and likely some amazing learnings to kind of enable our listeners to get a view of how you explore, how you execute, and how you judge success. And I think one of the themes we're going to hear today is the size of the organization actually doesn't matter. What matters is the level of experience of the people coming in to lead the program. And so what we hear so much from all of the guests on this webinar and all of the attendees is hopefully listening to this conversation just sparks an idea that you potentially could iterate and work off in your own organization. So with that, starting with you, Adrienne, I would love if you could quickly introduce yourself, your role, the firm you work for, provide a little context on how you got there, if that's okay with you to kick off the call.
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today. So I'm Adrienne Jaroch, and I'm the Firmwide Alumni Engagement Manager at Kirkland & Ellis. And the way I got here is actually, I think, a pretty linear path. I started working in alumni relations actually at a university. I was at Emory University in Atlanta, the director of alumni engagement for the business school. And there I worked with a population of about 18,000 alumni, what I thought at the time was a very manageable population. There was a lot of great, I guess, historical perspectives happening at the school. They had a great alumni program from the university as a whole, and the business school was just deeply rooted in tradition. And so I really enjoyed my time there. I learned a ton. Emory really has a top alumni engagement program, so it was a great, I guess, training ground almost for me. And then shortly after, I got a phone call from EY with an opportunity to move back to Chicago, which is where I'm from. So I, of course, wouldn't pass up that phone call. And what I realized very quickly after I took the job at EY was that everything I really needed to know to be able to manage an alumni program at a company, I learned at Emory. I just needed some time to learn the business and to really see how everything that I was doing in an alumni engagement strategy, how that then impacted the business and how I could be the most helpful to helping to grow and expand that program within EY. And so like James mentioned, there were 275,000 alumni at EY just in the US alone, 1 million globally. And that was a very different population to be working with. It felt a lot like everything we were doing was the peanut butter approach. How much can you what can you do that covers the most number of people in broad strokes? So after about 4 years there, I got a phone call to join Kirkland & Ellis, and I really was excited by the opportunity to take everything that I had learned and try it in a new industry. And from everything I've seen, the legal industry is growing rapidly around the area of corporate alumni engagement programs. So Kirkland has about 4,500 alumni. I joke that I'm going to know all of their names and birth dates and children's and jobs and career paths because it's just such an opportunity to really have personal one-on-one connections that I really feel like I've never actually been able to have in my previous roles. So just a little bit about how I got here, and I'm looking forward to talking with you all today.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. I love that peanut butter approach. One of the things we heard from Karen from KPMG on one of the last calls was she talked about get your glaze on, which is you've got to find a way to get your glaze across the whole cake. You can't just apply it to one segment. So peanut butter, glaze. Apparently in professional services. I was about to say there's a running theme. Apparently eat more is the running theme. So Danya, I'm going to ask you to do the same little intro, little context of how you got here, and just to make this so unfair for you, why you don't drink coffee.
Okay, so I am Danya, and I've been at Greenberg Traurig for about 8 months now. So just to give you some history about me, right after I graduated undergrad, I spent 7 years working in global law firms in New York City, and I was mainly in the marketing and legal department. I decided that I wanted to get a grad school degree, so while working at major law firm, I was accepted to NYU in their public relations and corporate communications field. And I realized that I couldn't work long law firm hours and go to grad school at night. So with that being said, I started to look at other opportunities. And that's when I was provided an offer with Columbia Law School. So when I was working at Columbia Law School for about 6.5 years. I was the assistant director of international events of Alumni Relations, and I directly led and developed alumni events in major cities across the US, as well as Asia, Europe, and Latin America. So I loved working with alums, and just like Adrienne, I learned so much. I think it's really important that in order to go into the corporate alumni relations field, having that alumni relations background in a university is essential, because you sort of get the foundation and you learn so much while in the alumni relations field that it's easier when you make that transition. But in 2017, I started reading about corporate alumni relations, and to be honest, I haven't really heard much about corporate alumni relations back in 2017, but after I started learning more, I applied to a company called Verisk, which is a globally traded public data analytics and risk management company based, their headquarters was in New Jersey. So my role was to launch their alumni relations program for 10,000 employees in about 29 countries, which was very different than working in education. So I actually launched their alumni program in 6 months, and it was done so fast that I was featured in a webinar called From Zero to Lightspeed, the creation of the Verisk Alumni Network. Currently, I'm now at GT. I'm working out of the New York office, and I'm focusing on creating their alumni network. So I'm sorry this was a long response, but I was hoping that you can see the full circle, because I'm doing what I love and I'm working with attorneys again. So it's a win-win situation.
I love that. You could take as long as you want to talk about that. And I think that brings up
and why actually, I don't drink coffee, right?
Yeah.
I'm just very energetic all the time. So I just figured I haven't had coffee in a long time. We were just joking about that before we started the call.
So so number one is that, again, the whole concept of not drinking coffee is very unfamiliar to me. But moving on from there, without making that a running theme through the entire call, I want to ask Adrienne, I want to come back to this one topic to both of you, but starting with you, Adrienne, about this conversation around education and higher ed alumni. There is this wider conversation that people have that say they're very different. The only thing in common between higher ed alumni and corporate alumni is the word alumni. The intent, the motivators, the personas, the expectations, the objectives, it's all different. So how can it possibly be valuable to start in a higher ed environment and move into corporate based on, and again, that general concept that people have, which is the only thing in common is higher ed alumni are just trying to get money out of their alumni versus corporate alumni objectives. So I'm going to let you take over and answer some question that was buried in there somewhere.
Sure. Well, I'd have to say I completely disagree with anyone who says that a university alumni program has nothing in common with a corporate alumni program. I said this earlier, that I think most of the foundation of the work that I do, I think, is still rooted in university practices, but it really is about figuring out how those things align with your business now. And so some of the things that any alumni program is going to have, they're going to have an alumni database with either good or bad data. They're going to have a newsletter. They're going to have events. They're going to have, people whose jobs are responsible for engaging with certain, people in their portfolio. And it's basically the exact same thing. You just might use different words. Instead of talking about someone who graduated and went into a job, you're talking about someone who left. When I was at EY, we would talk about people who left and went into industry roles instead of someone who graduated. Here at Kirkland, we might talk about someone who left and went to an in-house role. And you're still staying connected and engaged with those people for a variety of reasons, one of which is to ultimately drive business back to your firm at some point. And I think the analogy to a university is you're staying connected to those people to at some point drive a financial donation back to your university. And so at the end of the day, we're actually still talking about money. It's just the strategies and the words we use around it that might be a little bit different. So one of the ways and I think one of our topics is around innovation. I think one of the ways to really be innovative is to keep an eye on what's happening in the university world. Those programs have been around for hundreds of years, and they've been incredibly successful for a reason. These corporate alumni programs that are really just getting their start have a lot of very similar, if not exactly the same, pieces to their program. So I think it's a little bit short-sighted to think that we have nothing in common. It's very much the same.
So I would tend to totally agree with you, Adrienne. Before I turn over to Danya, I would tell you that community is community. Assess their needs, understand the people, understand what motivates them, and deliver that. So that conversation spans across education, corporate, any type of community, any type of village, essentially. And I think people misunderstand that village mentality applies. Just because there's a KPI on recruitment or something else, it really doesn't change either of those. So Danya, with that, I guess I want to kind of follow on, let you follow on if you want to add anything to what Adrienne said, but also you're coming from Verisk, data analytics, global, publicly traded company, big, lots of people, lots of hierarchy, matrix organization, to law firms, which is lawyers and everyone else. And how are you kind of approaching that? How are you understanding that? And I guess, are you seeing any core differences or challenges that you have been able to take from your experiences into your new role?
Well, I think that's a great question. I almost want to say, working at Columbia Law School in the Alumni Relations Department, I almost want to say it's very similar to working at GT, at this law firm, because ultimately the professors are attorneys, and even though it's in education, it was sort of a lot easier for me to transition working at Columbia Law School to GT than it was for me to transition from working in education into, like you said, a humongous, globally publicly traded company that was very corporate. So I wanted to also agree with Adrienne in what she said about how it is really beneficial, and it's very similar going from education into a corporate alumni network, because alumni, basically it's the same, their ability to maintain friendships and stay connected for various beneficial reasons. And also going in on what Adrienne said, it is just different words. Former attorneys can go in-house and ultimately become our client. Also, former employees may refer candidates that they know, and they're likely to succeed in our firm culture. So I don't really see alumni relations in a corporate company or in a law firm or in a university as different, but can be somewhat challenging, and I think that's why the job is so exciting, because every day is different, and I'm always just trying to take it one day at a time and engaging and finding authentic ways to make sure our alums at the law firm are like really interested in participating.
Yeah, I love that. Basically, what you both said is same magic, different words, and perhaps a little bit more political stuff of working in the corporate side. But I totally agree. So if we were to think about that and continue that same thought process of who should lead, who should own, where should this program live, I'm really curious, and I think some people on this panel will be, because I already see a question coming in around this, is who do you report up to, and where do you live in the organization in terms of, and I'm going to start with you, Danya, like what is your reporting structure from a value and how you report up goes to what team are you part of, and how do you make sure that you can be part of every team, essentially get your peanut butter on across the entire slice to a certain extent, to steal Adrienne's thoughts?
So I think it depends on the culture of the firm. At Columbia Law School, we had a dedicated Alumni Relations department. So at Verisk, the alumni program lived in the marketing department. And now at GT, the alumni program lives in the integration department. So because integration focuses on the life cycle of the attorney at the firm and beyond. Right now, we have a team of 5 people in our integration department, and I think it actually is working pretty well.
So can I ask another question? So you're in a rare spot. Most people come out of marketing, recruiting, business development. Most people, especially in law firms, they want to just get more data, update interactions, make sure they know where their people are going, but it's usually coming out of comms, marketing, or business development. Whereas your organization has actually said that this data is fundamental to the organization as a whole. So from a life cycle perspective, so I'm just trying to get a little bit understanding like how you approach it. When they said, hey, you're going to be in an integrations department, were you like, yay, high five, or like, what is that?
I think it was a little bit of both. I think it was like, yay, high five, what is that? But then, but then once it was explained to me, it really makes sense because, as I said before, it's an attorney life cycle. So it's basically the onboarding, greeting attorneys, like providing them with all the information that they need to know with the firm's culture, as well as when they're offboarding, when they're exiting, just making sure that they have everything they need, seeing like just anything, if they need anything, getting their personal email address.
Right.
So I think it's a good place to be because we're in integration. We're also set up where it's across all channels in the firm, and I think it's important to stay in dialogue for all of the initiatives. When HR is talking about something, we're thinking about it, or if diversity is talking about something, we're aware of it. So it's really a good place to be because at the end of the day, you are speaking to, you have to connect with various departments in the firm because that's really the only way to be successful in an alumni program.
Yeah, for sure. Integration. So high five, what is that? It's a takeaway. that I totally get, by the way, and I'm totally with you. And I think that's an interesting concept because as I push this to Adrienne, I'd like to add a little section of that, which is, look, every organization has their metrics, their KPI, their objectives, which allow them to get bigger budget, bigger numbers, more support staff, people to help you, all the things that you may want to do to try your programs that require money. And very often that's defined by where your program lives is based on X value the firm expects. So almost the same question to you, Adrienne, of kind of where do you live, where do you report into, and how do you associate that back to value to the organization?
Yeah, so I think my situation is actually quite similar, that I'm housed in our legal recruiting and development department, which really does allow me to have kind of a view of the full life cycle of an attorney. I think an example I would dive a little bit deeper into is that is my experience at EY, where the alumni department technically fell under brand marketing and communications, which was responsible for both your internal communications, but also kind of your external PR and marketing. And that actually, again, was similar to kind of seeing the life cycle of an attorney, allowed me to be at the epicenter of what was happening both internally and externally, and seeing and being a part of those updates that were coming into the firm regularly. So I had a very close tie with our markets and business development department, and knowing what they were focused on and what their initiatives were and how we could possibly include alumni in their programming. But I also had a very close connection with our HR or talent division, which span all the way from recruiting and their time at the firm to the time that they would leave the firm. So I think wherever your program sits, the ideal situation is that you're aware of kind of the priorities for your organization, both internally and externally, and you're thinking through how your alumni can be a part of that or be impactful in achieving whatever those goals are already stated. And so I think one of your questions was about like KPIs of an alumni program, and I think every organization likely starts their alumni program for similar reasons, yet they may have some different KPIs. And it's always hard when people start asking questions about how are you measuring success of your alumni program, because it's a little squishy. It's not easy to always measure relationships. Sure, you can measure when there's a win and some business comes in the door, but you can't always pinpoint that it was because of this newsletter that focused on this topic, or it was because of this relationship that was built at this event. You can't always pinpoint that. So I think where your program is housed, as long as it allows you to have the maximum amount of exposure across all areas of the firm, that's probably going to have the biggest impact.
So amazing, and I totally agree about this concept of how do you get the data of exactly how you got that value. We tend to think that value is measured of did you give them as much as they give you. It's not necessarily how many recruits, how many business development, but very often organizations want to be able to assign it to the CRM. How much net new business did we get that an alumni was attached to? We're seeing kind of this more robust thought process to how we measure value, and that's being countered by your opinion, Adrienne, which is, well, 1 second, before we can ask for something, we have to deliver value, and if we deliver value, then they will bring us value. And I think my question, to you, being the size of your organization, your firm, is how important is the alumni program from a looks perspective, as in to new recruits, to new clients? Like, how much does your alumni program impact kind of the general view of how your firm is looked at?
So I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, I think it's huge. I think that me being able to share our alumni program with our summer associates can be a differentiator for them when they are looking at making a final decision during on-campus interviews. I think just like a university would share who their prominent alumni are, and that you would be, by coming here, you would be joining this network of these prominent alumni, companies need to start doing the same thing, sharing the stories, like you said earlier about, the alumni in history, sharing the stories of, coming to Kirkland and having this Kirkland experience and basically getting another Kirkland degree can help you go on to do these amazing things. I actually have had 2 interns working with me this summer, and of course I always have them do a lot of data management, and that means a lot of stalking on LinkedIn and state bar sites and things like that. But both of them want to go to law school in the future and become attorneys. And what they really enjoyed was actually seeing the career path of our people since they've left the firm, because those aren't necessarily things that people are talking about. I think historically when we looked at recruiting people to our firms, it was just about why you would come here. And it wasn't about what your future career path could be by coming here. It could be that you stay and you make partner and you become the chairman of the firm at some point in time. Amazing. We need that, right? But it could also be that you move on to, start your own startup company, that you move on to have, to be the general counsel of some organization, that there's a lot of different career paths, and I think it's time that we start talking about that during recruitment, and that'll have a big impact on the way that recruits see your organization.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, there's a view that every few years people reevaluate where they stand and are they in the right place and what they want to do. And I think the job mobility market is definitely increasing that. I mean, we're seeing that even with your prior firm, with EY, the EY gigs, we're seeing that with law firms where there's now startups that are doing law firms on demand for smaller companies to be able to access amazing attorneys, that perhaps they couldn't have done prior. So if I was to move to you now, Danya, on a slightly more controversial question, and you're welcome to answer this as your personal thoughts or as part of your organization. But this question is really about who should join, and this conversation of how do you define what is an eligible alumni. And for some companies, it's tenure, other it's employment type. But in law firms, it's often attorneys versus everyone else. And I was in a meeting recently where there was a conversation around defining alumni, and there was a lady in the board, and she literally stood up and said, I could not charge what I charge without the entire support system that exists in this organization for me, whether it's the receptionist who greets my clients and makes them feel welcome, my notary, my assistant, my researchers. How can we call ourselves an inclusive firm if we're only recognizing me, the tip of the iceberg? So after she gave that speech, obviously I did an inside little clap and wanted to give her a standing ovation, but she didn't win that battle. Ultimately, that firm decided it was going to be attorneys only. I couldn't believe it because I thought she gave a compelling argument, but again, that's what she does for a living. So moving to you, Danya, how are you even approaching this conversation coming from Verisk, which is very inclusive, everyone's welcome, to now you're starting to think about your alumni strategy, and is it inclusive? And if not, why not? And everything controversial about that question that you want to answer and nothing you don't want to.
Okay, well, I think this is a great question. I also think this is an important question. When I worked at Verisk, everybody in the company was included, including all of the employees and anyone that left the company. If they were the receptionist, if, they were like, basically everyone was included. But when I went to a law firm, it was a little different. So when I first came to GT, we realized that we're going to be focusing on attorneys because most law firms follow best practices of what other law firms are doing with their alumni program, which again is mainly having attorneys in the alumni network. But our firm also understands that this can come with challenges. So for example, we have marketing directors that have been with us for 10 or even 20 years. So after speaking to our leadership team, we agreed that our main focus is to launch the alumni network and focus on attorneys. And then after the program is up and running, we will then revisit and discuss including directors and business staff. And given all the data that we have on our alumni, our recommendations, as you know, there are so many different types of attorneys, so we're going to go and include anywhere from shareholders, associates, retirees, summer associates who did not accept our offer, and then foreign law clerks, practice group attorneys, resident attorneys, current attorneys, and that's what we're going to be focusing right now, because I'm not sure if anyone knows this yet, but I'm in the middle of launching the alumni program since I've been here for a few months now, but that's our main focus for right now.
So Danya, number one is I apologize for not giving that context that you're in the midst of that strategy. So totally recognize that. That's totally on me. So I have an interesting question about that one. So I actually tend to agree, which is double down on your strengths instead of trying to focus on your weaknesses. Your strengths are get your alumni, who are your attorneys, make an amazing program for them, and then extend onto your next block. Inclusive doesn't mean everyone. We really don't believe that, go for the medium white t-shirt approach. We really believe that if you try and serve everyone, you serve no one. But it's still a conversation. I still go back to that lady who was a senior partner at the firm who was just adamant that how can you be an inclusive firm and exclude them? And I think a lot of the conversation came back to, well, they need different things. And I was like, well, she was like, obviously, different needs matrix, different ideology, different expectations, different version of what value means to them. And so you don't have to offer CLE credits to your receptionist. And I think as I move this to you, Adrienne, same question. You've been really good at extrapolating the question out of my speeches. Same question, whatever you think the question might be in there.
Whatever I think it might be. So I've worked I've worked at organizations where it was inclusive of everyone, and now obviously at a law firm where it's just focused on our attorneys. And I can see both sides of the coin. You're very right in saying that the needs of maybe a support staff and what they would be looking out of an alumni engagement program are very different than what an attorney might be looking for. And I think some of the big questions you have to ask yourself when you're going to create a program is really, what can you support? If you're going to include all of your support staff, is that going to double or maybe even triple the size of your alumni program? If so, do you have additional human resources and financial resources that are going to allow you to be able to either target your communications, focus on what they're looking for, segment your events so that it's a like-minded group of people getting value out of those. How are you going to really work with each of those populations, because they are looking for different things. And I think one of the big differentiators within a law firm is that there is very much a difference between a practicing attorney and a staff member. And when I was at EY, people were ebbing and flowing from client-serving roles into what we called core business services, which was basically your staff, back and forth, because there were various degrees that weren't necessary in the same way that they are at a law firm with a law degree. So I think you have to really look at, from a law firm perspective, that there are very big differences. And I'm not at all counting out the fact that your support staff 100% enable our client servers to do their jobs. I mean, technically, if you think about it, I'm not included in my own alumni program. Should I leave Kirkland at some point, I would not be invited to those alumni events. But I fully understand that the focus of this program is on our attorneys, and I think there's real value in that. And I'm very appreciative of the fact that I have a manageable program size and the right number of resources to go along with that manageable program size. So you have to look at both sides of the coin.
Yeah, and thank you for finding the question. So would it be fair to say that actually this is not a conversation about inclusive or exclusive? This is a conversation about focusing your efforts where you can achieve the most value without having to segment your audience so wildly. Would that be a fair-ish representation?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, because I think there's been this approach of it being looked at as kind of inclusive versus exclusive, good versus bad. And by excluding them, are you necessarily stating their lack of value or lack of importance? And I think you put it very, very well that no, it's got nothing to do with that. It's about really making sure you focus on the areas that you can knock it out of the park. But at the same time, communicating that it's certainly not an inclusive versus exclusive. And I'm sure we could talk for an entire hour, probably with most of the attendees on this call, about that one topic, because I know that a lot of people ask about it and talk about it and try different things. I know we're seeing more and more firms say, well, maybe we can open up our annual event to everyone, or maybe we can have a separate list just for X, Y, and Z. And so I definitely appreciate that. I think as a final question to this, who should join, is this conversation of when they should join. One of the things that we really have seen more and more is that you can't have an alumni network that's hidden in the basement. You have to have an alumni network that's part of your culture, part of your core being, part of your employee experience. And therefore, the alumni network, for some organizations, you can join when you start at the company. Others, you join when you leave, but you find that you have that drop-off because when you've left, there's nothing mandating you to sign up. So Danya, maybe I'll let you go first. When do you think, someone should join this network? Is it when they start with the organization and perhaps they're more willing to do something you ask them to do? Or is it when they leave and they no longer have focus on your organization, instead have focus on their next opportunity?
Sure. So we will talk about it during the onboarding process just because it's part of the culture of our firm. And since our senior leadership really believes in the program, we will continue the messaging and we really want people to talk about it. Also, again, since we're in integration and when attorneys are leaving, I reach out to them as soon as they leave and invite them to join the alumni program.
Perfect. Adrienne, any follow-up or view on the whole onboarding, offboarding conversation?
Yeah, so I would change the conversation of, when do you have them join your alumni network to really be, when are you talking to them about your alumni network? Because I always say that you're already a part of it. By coming to Kirkland, you're a part of this network. We use the slogan, colleagues for life. So as soon as you join, you are a colleague for life, whether you stay or whether you go, right? And I think, again, I think I've mentioned this earlier, that if we got back to when universities start talking about your alumni, it's during recruitment. So I wanted to share a story from my time at EY. I vividly remember my orientation. It was, 3 days long. We were stuck in a room, people working in various different service lines and very different work. And it was the IT guy who was there helping us set up our computers, who just played this video because he, quote, really enjoyed it. He really liked it. And he wanted to share it with us while we were all there setting up our computers. And he didn't know it, but it was actually the alumni video. And if you Google EY and the Maria video, it has a great name, Maria video, you can actually see it. And I think this video was years ahead of its time because it really showed people joining an organization and how they could go in different paths and then reconnect back together at an alumni event and share in their successes. And he also, that IT guy also doesn't know that that had a profound impact on me, and then became something we talked with our HR talent team about at EY to basically have that become a standard component of their orientation. There's so much that they had to cover during orientation, and the fact that he just felt the need to show that video, I think dropped a seed, planted a seed, that alumni are important to this firm for a variety of reasons. And so I think starting to talk about it earlier is really your best option. Connecting with people after they have left is great, but it's too late. You need to be talking to them about it while they're still at your firm. I think, I'm not sure if later we'll talk about newsletters, but just as much as your external alumni newsletter is important, you really need to think about what you're communicating internally, what's your messaging there, because you really want your current people to be the ones that are connecting with those alumni now and really thinking about the alumni network, maybe just at a different angle while they're here, but then the awareness is already there before they're even thinking about leaving or before they've left.
Yeah, I totally agree, Adrienne. I think that's so critical. I think people forget that the greatest way to get alumni engagement is by getting employee engagement, because every employee knows 2, 3 alumni, and if it's part of what you do. So I love that story about EY and the Maria video. I will certainly Google that. What I think I also heard, which is quite interesting, and I tend to agree with, is they're an alumni whether they like it or not. The question is whether or not you're collecting their data and communicating with them via an email newsletter. And I think there's an important differentiation. They are still an alumni. They're still maybe viewing your content on social. Whether or not they've logged into your platform is a different conversation entirely, but it doesn't change whether they're an alumni and therefore part of that experience. So thank you for that. So moving to something I couldn't work out how to title, so I just called it How Do You Even? Because I think this is a really broad topic, and this conversation is just, how do you think about innovating? How do you think about strategy? How do you think about always having a different suite of compelling events and benefits and value drivers that people who are at the top of their game will enjoy and will engage with? So maybe continuing with you, Adrienne, like when you are, do you get time to think? And if you do get time to think, how do you go about thinking around innovation and trying things and ideating your ideas? And the second is, how do you think about executing and measuring your success and working out what's working?
So a couple of things come to mind, especially when I was new to the organization here. Some of the most important conversations I could have were with people who had already left the firm, who were already alumni. So I took some time, whether it was reaching out and connecting with people at alumni events, connecting with them through opportunities to interview them for our newsletter, or even just reaching out to some well-connected alumni to have lunch and hear about their experience. That kind of gave me a huge amount of information about the program and the perception of it, right? And the other huge factor has been connecting with people in their last week at the firm, and hearing from them what they're looking for out of staying connected, what's going to be the most valuable to them, whether or not they already had awareness about the alumni engagement program is always top of mind for me, because if they've been here and we've been messaging them, what piece did they remember about what I said and what resonated with them? So I think those will give you some very good windows into what your current alumni are seeing and what your new alumni have identified. And then from there, you want to make sure that you are a part of the conversation happening internally at the firm. And I think that could be easy or hard, really depending on the amount of leadership support that you have. You can come in, and I actually think I see one of the questions that came in online was about, do you think it's important to have a director of alumni engagement that runs a robust program? Absolutely. I think that's super important. And I think it really shows that your organization is going to place value on that program. But it also, I would say you want to make sure there's a tone coming from the top that this position is going to be supported and that this person is going to be put at the table, because the tone from leadership is that they want them there. So one thing I could really encourage is having some sort of executive sponsorship that either introduces you to those teams and helps to place you at that table, because getting in at the ground floor for conversations is going to be very impactful. And the last thing I would say is how you can kind of enact some of these things that you learn through conversations. I always am of the mindset that any person who's looking to include alumni for the first time in their program, whether it's a business development initiative, a talent initiative, or whatever, they're looking at me like I am extra work for them. They do not have time for it. They're already busy. If I hear one more time, I'm already at capacity, that would basically mean that no alumni would ever be included in things that are already happening. So I always view it as my job to do whatever I can to hand it to them on a silver platter. I want them to view working with alumni engagement as the easiest thing they've ever done and the biggest value add. So how can I make it easy on them and then help them reap the rewards from it? And then I absolutely turn around and also tell the story of how we had XYZ number of alumni attend this client event, and then I followed up with them afterwards, and this is what they had to say. So again, getting back to the how am I measuring the success of that program, it may be on the numbers of alumni that are attending something, the number of alumni who join a webinar, but a lot of it's anecdotal. The amount of thank you notes that I have handwritten back from alumni, I think speaks volumes to the experience that they've had. And I can share that easily with share partners when they ask for it.
I love that so much, handwritten notes. I was going to say, what's a handwritten note, but I didn't want to make too late.
My handwriting is very, very good, because I will say that it's probably one of the most important components of alumni engagement. And I learned that again from universities. Every person in my portfolio got a birthday card. Every appointment that I had got a follow-up handwritten note. And I've kept that with me.
That's so amazing. I think there's, the very beginning, you talked about this concept of how do you find out what's the value to the person, and so many people forget, well, just meet them, just talk to them, just ask them, what are you trying to achieve? Nothing to do with alumni, what are your goals? I think the second thing you mentioned, and Danya, I'm about to turn this over to you, is this conversation around executive sponsor. We've seen in other firms where the alumni leader didn't know a lot of people or didn't know everyone, hadn't been there long enough, and they had to go up to a partner and say, hey, can you introduce me to Sally at X company, because she's doing this. I think she'd be amazing for a webinar. I think she'd be amazing for X, but can you either introduce me or can you take the lead and invite her? And so you start to see, and again, you can correct me if you've seen something different, where the partners are suddenly actually acting as the liaison to their old colleagues. And I think the third thing you mentioned that was really interesting was this silver platter, which is walking in with just the value drivers. I'm going to make it easy. I'm going to show you the success before I walk in. And so, Danya, as you're starting to think about your strategy as an organization, are you thinking about kind of alumni stakeholders, a steering committee, a few people you might bring in the office and interview and talk to? How are you even focusing or thinking about what value you can deliver to your community? And I know that's a very wide question, so I apologize.
Well, like I said before, having executive sponsorship, as you know, is critical in launching an alumni program, and that goes with Verisk as well as any law firm or any company. And also, I want to reiterate, because we're an integration, we are set up in so many different channels where there's constant dialogue on what's going on with the firm. And our team participates in monthly firm-wide marketing meetings. So every single month, I get to know what's going on in Phoenix, what's going on in Boston, what's going on overseas. And it's great because I'm fortunate enough to listen on these updates with GT and find ways to incorporate alumni through that process. We had some great stories because we do have various offices that have kept an ongoing list of alumni, and we are in the process of hosting an upcoming alumni reception in Boston next month, and we're doing it in conjunction with Boston's 20th anniversary. So it seems as if we try to just, as of right now, since our program hasn't launched yet, we're slowly trying to do things that are in conjunction with a milestone or celebrating one of our offices. And I also have a good story from our Phoenix office because they hosted an alumni reception and included current attorneys, with the main objective being that Phoenix is a relationship town, and they wanted to introduce their new leadership since it wasn't just an event, but it was a good touch point. And I think, like Adrienne was saying, we go back on, great stories, but the marketing manager in Phoenix said a year later, 3 alumni came back to work in the Phoenix office, which was huge. And I know, like I said before, every firm or every company is different. It really is what matters to the company, and also what executive sponsorships really would like to see. Because when I was working at Verisk, they were a really big CSR company. Corporate social responsibility was really important to them. So I worked really closely with the marketing team, and I launched the first ever alumni and employee volunteer day, which I worked with Junior Achievement, and we did a whole day of bringing high school mentors into the company, and alums were able to come back and see how the firm changed after so long, because we did a whole new upgrade in the firm, and then also to really give their expertise, whether they were retired or they left to go to another company, and mentor high school students. And it wasn't just alums, but it was also employees that were all able to do this activity together. So that was it's just another example of how different these alumni activities could be. And I was able to also get really great praise from executive leadership at the company, and everyone really loved that activity. So it was again something that people still talk about to this day, because it was new and it was authentic and it was engaging.
I think you nailed it. It was new. It was something different that people want. I think that's the hunt that we're all looking for, is what will make people open that email, what will make people want to engage, what will make people want to update their data. So I think that's amazing. I love the concept of that day in so many ways. In our last few minutes, I have a quick question for both of you. Adrienne, the first is, how do you think about competition when you may have a former employee who is now a member of 3 alumni networks? Why should they listen or open your email? Why should they care? How do you differentiate when everyone's kind of trying to do the same thing or not?
So I think there's 2 key factors that I think about there. One is brand, and one is their experience. Is your brand strong enough in the market that they're going to want to stay connected to you? Because that's a big driver, right? If they have that stamp of whatever your law firm is and it's seen well in the marketplace, they're going to want to stay connected to you because you're seen and viewed well in the marketplace. And then the other piece of it is going to be their experience while they're at the firm. And if they had a positive experience while they were here, they were celebrated and encouraged when they received an offer to go somewhere else, and they were supported in their time while they were transitioning out of the firm, they're going to stay connected to you because they've already felt the love. So again, making sure that you're not having the conversation after they're gone, but doing it while they're still here is going to really help keep them connected, as opposed to try and get them back after they're gone.
Yeah, that's an amazing view. And Danya, I guess, as you think about your strategy, what you've told us essentially is you guys do have an alumni program. You have a successful alumni program. It's brought in 3 rehires in the Phoenix office. You've done the 20th anniversary in Boston. So actually you have a thriving program. What's changing is that you're going to normalize your data, organize your data, put it into a system that lets you better engage and better manage, but it shouldn't detract from the fact that you already have a successful program. This is just the evolution of it. So how do you think about that same thing, that kind of coming in a bit later to the game with a program? How do you compete with, Adrienne, how do you compete with anyone else in the market to say, hey, it's been a minute, join ours, you've left 10 years ago?
Well, before I start, I want to say that we are in the middle of having an official alumni program. We've had, since I've been new here, I have talked to other offices to see what they've been doing with their alums, just to see if there's any history. Some offices have alums that they have recorded, some don't. So as of right now, I'm just gathering history, and I'm also just in the middle of officially launching an alumni program. So it's not there yet, but it's getting there. I think Adrienne and I both agree that we should follow what college alumni programs do, because they've always had to compete with each other. People are in undergrad, business school, law school. So this is something that, going back to what Adrienne said, to really look at what colleges have done with their alumni programs, and to really learn and learn from them and move forward and placing it into the corporate alumni relations world. GT is hard at work to always be best in class across multiple areas, and I can see how this can be a challenge. However, every law firm culture is different. We're trying to deliver value and make it worthwhile. It's nice to have events, but it's better to deliver something else, such as an opportunity for an alum to come back and speak. Also, just maybe focusing on some retirees. We're trying to provide engaging ways to always attract our attorneys and alum. Right now, GT has a program called GT Drives. It's a diversity and inclusion website, and that has really taken off within our firm. I'm going to be starting to work with our head of diversity in the future to see how we can implement some alumni diversity events as well. And some of the examples above just show how our firm is authentic and how we really care about the firm. And I really want to incorporate the same value to our alums. So I also understand that some of our ideas might overlap. Like, for example, having an alumni newsletter featuring alumni spotlights, having alumni events. But I feel that every experience is different, especially at our firm.
I love that answer from both of you, and I want to thank both of you now at the top of the hour for taking your time and for providing this feedback. I know there's some questions we have in. I'll provide those via email, but I just want to say again, I'm really appreciative of you guys making time for this. So again, thanks, Adrienne. Thank you, Danya. Thank you to all of our attendees. We'll send out a recording of this, and we look forward to our next one next month with SAP and IBM, focusing on how alumni engagement begins with the employee experience. So thank you again, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.